You should hear what keeps him up at night.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there.
Well, he's half right. We do need a wall. You know, to keep out gang members, fentanyl dealers, human traffickers, and Anna Navarro. What's funny, though, is that Stern actually thought that was a compliment. Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one. This week on his radio show, Howard Stern defended wokeism, saying it's a compliment when someone calls him woke. Listen.
If woke means I can't get behind Trump, which is what I think it means, or that I support people who want to be transgender, or I'm for the vaccine, dude, call me woke as you want. I'm not for stupidity, but I am woke, motherfucker, and I love it.
Oh dear, he swore. He swore that'll win over the woke.
Greg Gutfeld didn't stop at personality. He went straight into the content. According to him, Howard Stern's show, which was once known for its raw, fearless humor, has now turned into something far more tame and predictable. Greg described it as watching a lion turn into a lapdog, declawed, domesticated, and far more interested in cozying up to A-list celebrities than challenging them. What was once edgy and unfiltered now feels as safe and scripted as a hotel lobby conversation. He didn't hold back on the interviews either. Greg remarked how Stern, who once made publicists sweat with his blunt questions, now serves up soft promotional chats where actors talk about their latest projects and, oddly enough, their favorite candle scents. If Howard got any cozier with his guests, Greg joked, the FCC might have to rate his interviews PG for pure goo. Then came the real punch, the hypocrisy. Gutfeld pointed out that Stern, who once mocked virtue signaling, now seems to be leading the charge. He called it performance penance. Howard's apparent mission to rewrite his controversial past by overcorrecting into full-blown moral caution. Greg quipped that if Stern delivers one more public apology for something he said 20 years ago, the Library of Congress might need to open a dedicated archive just for his on-air regrets.
But Stern being holed up in his house that long, it explains a lot of things, like how you forget how other people live, especially in hard times like a pandemic. For the longest time, 2 years in fact, the same time Stern's been AWOL, I wondered where he went. Not physically, but mentally. I bet you did too. Remember his screeds about COVID? They were epic and angry and...
But it wasn't just the content that changed, it was the attitude. Greg Gutfeld poked fun at how Howard Stern now carries himself like he's somehow above the very culture he once championed. Greg argued that what Stern calls growth looks more like retreat, a calculated step back the moment things got uncomfortable. Instead of standing by the edgy persona that made him famous, Stern folded under the weight of public scrutiny and tried to rewrite his own history. Greg also highlighted Stern's apparent new obsession with approval. Once proud of not caring what people thought, Stern now seems eager to win favor with the very cultural circles that used to dismiss him. Gutfeld painted the picture vividly, a once untouchable icon now seeking validation from the same institutions that once wished he'd go away. And then there's Stern's audience, or what's left of it. Greg joked that today's Stern listeners seem like a support group for people who miss the old days but are afraid to say it out loud, worried they might offend the man they used to admire. He compared listening to modern-day Stern to watching your favorite punk band ditch the guitars, wear linen shirts, and start doing ads for organic granola. Finally, Gutfeld turned to Stern's political shift. It's not the fact that he has opinions, everyone does, but that his new takes seem less about principle and more about fitting in. What once felt rebellious now feels rehearsed. For fans who grew up with the raw, no-holds-barred Stern, the transformation has been less like evolution and more like a slow fade into the background of the very mainstream he used to tear apart.
Stern used to throw bologna slices at strippers' butts. With accuracy, I might add. Now he's worried the possible leader of the free world can't handle his verbal foot rub. I wonder if he used to get this nervous for the strippers before he'd spank them on their bare asses with a dead fish.
If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss out on sharp takes and fresh commentary. Greg Gutfeld didn't hold back when tearing into how Howard Stern's politics have transformed over the years. What used to be a wild, unpredictable voice in media now sounds more like a politically correct hall monitor. Greg pointed out that Stern, once known for challenging everyone, now echoes the same narratives you can find trending on social media or looping on cable news. It's not just that he chose a side, it's that he seems to have outsourced his opinions entirely. The shift, according to Gutfeld, feels less like conviction and more like conformity wrapped in moral posturing. He joked that watching Stern scold others for the kind of edgy content he used to champion is like seeing a former bank robber become a mall security guard lecturing teens about shoplifting. The irony is heavy. The same man who once made a career out of pushing boundaries now sounds like he's enforcing them. And then there's Stern's newfound love affair with Hollywood. Greg mocked how Stern, who once railed against celebrity culture, now seems eager to be embraced by it. The constant name-dropping, the glowing praise for Alistairs. It's a far cry from the rebel radio host who made stars sweat during interviews. Gutfeld summed it up perfectly. Watching Stern cozy up to elite circles is like watching a retired cage fighter audition for a ballet. It might be graceful, but it's not what the crowd came for.
Theory, wokeism is a contagion. Stern got it from Jimmy Kimmel, his new best friend, and Kimmel got it from his wife, and his wife got it from where you get all infections, a toilet seat. Kat, I find that his definition of wokeism is very simplistic. I mean, it's like, it's not about COVID.
Greg took it a step further, questioning whether Howard Stern ever truly stood for anything, or if the whole act was always just that, an act. Maybe he wasn't the fearless truth-teller he built his brand on. Maybe he was just exceptionally good at reading the room, shocking his way to fame in an era that rewarded rebellion now. Greg suggested Stern is reading a different room and playing a new role, this time as the polished, progressive commentator who criticizes the very kind of irreverence he once embodied. But Greg argued this isn't evolution, it's erasure. It's not growth, it's revision. Stern isn't confronting his past, he's scrubbing it clean and pretending it was all a phase. But those wild years, that was his brand. That was who he was. Now, Stern layers on apologies and slogans so thick, it feels less like reflection and more like he's auditioning for sainthood. Greg called it what he sees it as, not maturity, but cowardice, dressed up as wisdom. Stern didn't face the music, he walked off stage and now critiques the crowd for still enjoying the concert. The transformation, Greg said, isn't admirable, it's predictable. Because that's what happens when rebels stop rebelling. They become exactly what they once mocked. They become comfortable. They become safe. And in Stern's case, maybe they become so determined to be accepted by the establishment that they forget what made them iconic in the first place.
Stop putting up with the idiots in this country and just say it's mandatory to get vaccinated. F them, f their freedom. I want my freedom to live.
Man, this guy makes Anthony Fauci sound like a Canadian trucker. But, maybe you should follow his next vaccine with a shot of Valium. But it's weird. He went from ridiculing the man to becoming him. No longer embracing rebellion, he French kisses regulation. He went from mocking a radio executive who was a rigid by-the-book a-hole that he named Pig Vomit to being Pig Vomit himself.
Greg didn't hold back when addressing what he saw as Howard Stern's dramatic shift from rebellious outsider to a voice of establishment conformity. Referencing Stern's support for vaccine mandates, Greg suggested it was a striking transformation. For someone who once championed radical freedom of expression, the man who built his career on challenging authority now seemed to be embracing it. Prioritizing control over questioning, with a mix of humor and critique, Greg compared Stern's current persona to the very figures he used to mock on air. The rebellious spirit that once defined Stern's brand appeared to have faded, replaced by a desire to align with mainstream approval. Instead of leading provocative conversations, he now appeared more concerned with hosting polite, predictable interviews with celebrity guests. Greg reflected on how Stern's unpredictability was once his greatest strength. Listeners never knew what to expect, and that made his voice exciting. Now, Greg claimed every segment felt rehearsed, safe, and polished to the point of dullness. Stern's commentary, he said, had become formulaic, echoing the same talking points circulating across cable news and social media. The critique wasn't rooted in bitterness, but in disappointment. For many, Stern represented a boldness that defied political correctness and censorship. Greg suggested that the true letdown wasn't that Stern evolved, but that the evolution seemed driven more by image management than personal conviction. In trying to rewrite his legacy, he might be erasing what made it compelling in the first place.
From getting people to fart songs out of their butt, to commiserating with the super wealthy about the evils of Trump, who was a guest on Howard's show many times. But I get it now. He's got new friends and they bring new views. It's celebrity peer pressure. But the fact that he hasn't left his house in 2 years means that his views are BS. He was in a happy self-imposed lockdown with everything. Mansion on the beach, limitless options for food and entertainment. That's not real life. That's a 2-year all-inclusive vacation at Sandals Royal Barbados.
Howard Stern's evolution over the years has been dramatic, and for many longtime fans, confusing. Once known for pushing boundaries with outrageous stunts and unfiltered humor, he now spends his airtime commiserating with Hollywood elites over politics, even taking shots at former guests like Donald Trump. Greg Gutfeld pointed out this contrast with sharp wit, describing it as a shift influenced more by celebrity peer pressure than genuine change. While Stern now champions fear-based messaging and extreme caution, Greg argued it's easier to do that from a luxurious beachside mansion, with every comfort at your fingertips. For most people, that's not lockdown, that's luxury. Greg went further, claiming that Stern, once the embodiment of chaotic energy and fearless speech, now seems more concerned with avoiding discomfort than challenging it. Where he once provoked outrage for the sake of conversation, he now appears to avoid it altogether, retreating into a controlled bubble of curated comfort. According to Greg, this transformation isn't a sign of maturity, but a kind of retreat. The man who once thrived on confronting the world now lives in a state of curated quiet, sipping tea instead of stirring the pot. For critics like Greg, it's less about evolution and more about retreating from the very authenticity that made Stern an icon in the first place.
Incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comics, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came. So I call this BFR. It's blackface reparations. There's nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt.
The rebel who once thrived on challenging norms now appears to find comfort in conformity. Greg Gutfeld zeroed in on what he sees as Howard Stern's most telling transformation, not just in content, but in legacy. Stern, once controversial, now seems focused on rewriting his history, softening the edges and rebranding past provocations as misguided steps toward some newly enlightened version of himself. But as Gutfeld quipped, legacy isn't built by erasing the past, it's about owning it. He likens Stern's evolution to that of a rock star who made headlines for smashing guitars, only to return decades later with an acoustic set and a speech on sustainability. Sure, some may politely applaud, but deep down, many miss the raw energy, the unpredictability, and the honesty. According to Greg, the real issue isn't that Stern changed, it's that he pretends he didn't. That denial, more than the transformation itself, is what disappoints the most. And just when it seemed like Greg might let up, he delivered one last blow. Stern, he claimed, isn't the king of media anymore. He's the court jester of the elite. Still in costume? Still performing? But no longer for rebellion, now for acceptance. And perhaps the most tragic part, he may not even realize the difference. With that, Gutfeld wrapped up his critique, a sharp, unfiltered look at a man who once defined shock radio, now navigating the world of polished approval and carefully curated image. For those wondering if Stern still has the edge he once did, Greg Gutfeld made it clear that edge has long since vanished.
It's what Howard said later on his radio show. Quote, "I really had an exhausting weekend. Emotionally, physically. For the first time in 2 years, I ventured out of the house." Now, maybe he's exaggerating. We all do that. In fact, the more successful you get in media, the more exhausting, the easier.
But the real story wasn't the dinner itself. It was what Howard Stern said afterward on his radio show. He admitted, "I really had an exhausting weekend emotionally, physically. For the first time in 2 years, I ventured out of the house." Maybe he was exaggerating. We all do that. But the more success you find in media, the more dramatic even the simplest things can sound. Greg Gutfeld didn't just comment on this. He dove in headfirst, with the confidence of someone who just discovered that his favorite subject had made himself an easy target. That subject, none other than Howard Stern, once the self-proclaimed king of all media. Now, in Greg's view, someone reading from cue cards crafted by PR experts, Gutfeld wasn't interested in tiptoeing. He brought sharp critique, clear focus, and left subtlety at the door. This wasn't just commentary, it was a full-on satirical takedown of a media icon whose transformation from edgy rebel to polished insider has left some longtime fans wondering what happened to the voice that once challenged the mainstream.
Face. It's not unlike Howard Stern. I mean, talk about a transition. On Tuesday, he conducted an interview with Kamala Harris that was so simpering and feminine, I got my period while listening to it.
Stern, once known as the bold and rebellious voice of outlaw radio, now seemed more... Gutfeld described it as watching a once explosive firebrand morph into a morning show regular trading controversy for calm, edge for elegance, sipping almond milk and sounding more like a retired life coach on a self-help tour than the fearless icon he once was.
Snacking with celebs at a fancy restaurant, exhausting. Exhausting. Like he finished the overnight shift in a coal mine. Or hearing Kat talk about her pets.
Fair.
But I get it, life is tough, especially when you've been cut off from the world for 2 years in a $20 million.
Gutfeld couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Howard Stern, a man who built his legacy on calling out inauthenticity, now seemed to embody it. Once the undisputed king of bold, unfiltered radio, Stern now approaches interviews with the softness of someone tiptoeing through a corporate office, careful not to disturb the HR department. Greg described it as one of the biggest plot twists in media, not because Stern had grown or matured, but because he'd embraced conformity with such enthusiasm, it made even the most polished television personalities look like rebels by comparison.
Wondering how she doesn't nap.
When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country.
Hold on. I need a minute.
Then Greg zeroed in on the irony. The same media elite and politically correct gatekeepers Howard Stern once mocked, the ones he railed against for being out of touch, are now the very people he caters to. Gutfeld joked that Stern went from blasting celebrity phoniness to fully embracing it. Almost like a sommelier serving up safe, agreeable opinions to impress the coastal cocktail crowd. The transformation, he said, wasn't just surprising, it was almost satirical. And to top it off, Greg pointed out how the man who built his brand by exposing fake celebrity behavior ended up marrying into that same world, becoming a reflection of everything he once vowed to dismantle.